to the tense budget battle that's been triggering those teacher walkouts and massive protests in Wisconsin. This morning, we're keeping an eye on 14 Democratic lawmakers who literally fled the state to delay a vote on the governor's new spending plan. President Obama and others have called it an assault on unions. Governor Scott Walker, says he's trying to avoid layoffs and balance the budget. Well, Brian Kennedy is the president of the American Federation of Teachers in Wisconsin. We should point out that in Wisconsin, you don't actually represent that many teachers necessarily, but you do represent about 17,000 workers who would be impacted by this bill. So thank you for spending some time with us this morning. So tell me, what do you think about these Democratic lawmakers who fled? Do you think that's the way to go?
I think that these lawmakers were absolutely showing their courage and their defense for working families here in Wisconsin. Left with no other option. They basically brought the actions of the Senate to a standstill. Unlike their Republican counterparts who've had thousands of their constituents coming from all over the state, and they refused to meet with taxpayers and voters in their districts because they knew that these voters and these taxpayers were going to tell them, we don't want you to vote for this. We don't want you to strip our rights.
Well, Mr. Kennedy, let me go back to a word you just used there, courage. You consider it courageous for someone who was elected by the people to do a job and fight for them at the State House. They left the state literally, and we have grown men hiding out right now and not going to do their job. You use the word courage.
What is courageous is to stand up and say rights that have been fought for over 50 years in this state, that have helped to create one of the best civil service sectors that you'll find in any state anywhere in the country, to strip that away in less than a week with no debate, to ignore the thousands of people who've come out in defense of public service. That is courage.
Oh, and you said standing up. They're not standing up. They're running.
No, they're not. They're standing up. They knew that if they stayed here, there'd be a vote, and rights that have been fought for 50 years would be lost.
Isn't that our system,
so they said, you know what, the last tool...
Isn't it our system?
The last tool in their arsenal was to deny a quorum.
They won the State House, they won the governor's office, and the way the process works, if you win and the people vote you in, you know what? Sometimes the other side is going to lose. That's the process, sir.
It is, but you know what? The same thing could be said about the U.S. Senate. And what happens there? A small minority continues to constantly filibuster every piece of legislation and brings that body to a standstill. We don't have filibusters here in Wisconsin. So the only thing that these brave senators could do was to leave the state so that they could not be forced or compelled to bring a quorum to the body.
Well, sir,
they stood up for worker rights.
You know what this is? I think that's a good equivalent for you to probably point out there, that this is the state equivalent of a filibuster. You don't have the same option, so that may be a good way to put that there as well. Let me turn to now some of the issues on the table. And sir, I guess what would state workers at this point, what would you be willing to give up? The governor is asking for the collective bargaining rights when it comes to everything besides wages to go away, also increase in pension and health care payments. I guess what are you willing to give?
Well, the state workers that we represent have already given concessions of over $100 million. And that was done, obviously, under the previous governor. Those contracts were rejected by the legislature. This governor says he needs an additional $30 million in concessions. We as unions are willing to come to the bargaining table and to discuss what those additional concessions, in addition to $100 million and additional 30, what that would look like, what more we could give up to help him to fill what's left of this budget hole. He has refused to answer any of our calls, refused to come to the table and negotiate. He has decided that the problem is the unions. I don't see how it's a problem if we're willing to come to the table and negotiate, and he's not the one willing to come to the table. He wants to strip our rights and then dictate exactly what the terms and conditions of employment are. And that's not our rich history here in Wisconsin. That's not Wisconsin values.
Let me ask you as well, are you willing to go to the table before the governor takes off the table the issue of taking away the collective bargaining rights? Is that a non-starter, I guess, in your opinion?
Taking away bargaining rights is a non-starter. We have reached out time and time and time again since November the 3rd, since the day after the election. His people have refused to return a single call. They have never even acknowledged the unions except to give us notices of termination of contract extensions. They don't want to come to the table and bargain. The bargaining's inconvenient to them. You know, and in terms of specifics, you know, we don't bargain in the news media. This governor has repeatedly gone to the news media and said what kind of concessions he wants. Those need to be done at the bargaining table, and we're more than happy to consider them. And I believe that we could bring to the table proposals that would be acceptable, that would fill this $30 million budget hole. But it has to be done through bargaining, not through stripping people of their rights and dictating what the terms and conditions of employment are.
Well, last thing to you here, Mr. Kennedy, to address, the governor has said he would assure, he would make promises that there wouldn't be furloughs and there wouldn't be layoffs if he made the moves that he is proposing to make. The other option, he says, thousands of layoffs. I guess the question is there some point you all, the unions there and the workers, going to have to balance out? Would we rather pay more and keep our jobs than to continue this fight and end up losing thousands of jobs?
You know, we were willing with the previous governor when we negotiated with him. He said the same thing to us, that there would be layoffs. So we chose to agree to furlough days. We chose $100 million in concessions. We're paying more for our health insurance. We're paying more toward our retirement. We not only had 0% pay increases, but we actually had 3% reductions because we were willing to accept the furlough days. So it was a loss of 3% of income. And in the return, we didn't get any layoffs. We're willing to work with this governor as well, but he needs to come to the bargaining table and bargain with the employees, not strip us of our rights and dictate what the terms and conditions of employment are.
Well, the entire country is watching, and what's happening in Wisconsin could certainly be an example of what we're going to see in other places. But again, I think people's hearts go out to you all on both sides. People love teachers and state workers, and everybody's hurting right now. And also feel for the governor and the state that has a $3.5 billion budget shortfall. So, sir, we're going to watch closely. We absolutely appreciate you taking the time, though, this morning. Hope to catch up with you again.
Yep.